Coming up on this week's episode of Needed Conversations.
Most of the time, people, when they say intimacy, they think, sex. But
right away.
Intimacy is cultivated in every single day moments, every little thing
every
that you
interaction,
do, every interaction, the emotional connection. It makes sex that much more pleasurable because this person.
Intimacy is about the pursuit of knowledge, continuing to stay enrolled at the university of your spouse. I was just listening to a testimony that came across my social media feed about this husband who had deconstructed his faith, and he came to his wife and said, I no longer believe in God, and I also want a divorce. Mm-hmm. And they actually divorced, and she went through a wilderness period. And just to hear her talk on stage, she said, yes, my husband did all of these things, but I was so blind to my part in the marriage, that I thought that I was spotless lamb over here and being persecuted and crucified, but I had stuff inside of my heart and the soil of my heart that needed to be mended by God as well. And he used that time, and their testimony is they got remarried. He came back to the faith. I believe they're in ministry now. Just an incredible. I want us to look at intimacy from this perspective. My wife loves gardening, and as it's springtime, she's been outside tilling the ground. She's been preparing the flower beds and the garden beds.
You can't just think, I'll just throw in the seeds, whatever grows, and if not, who cares? You can't come with that expectation.
I say to men all of the time, the wife you have is the wife you've cultivated.
The purpose of a mission-based marriage is that you are able to produce so much that your house overflows. You never know what you're able to do, what your marriage is able to do.
What your marriage can produce.
When you are working out of the overflow. Don't wait until it's so overgrown with weeds. Now we have to till the ground for months and months and months.
There's an opportunity for you to restore your marriage, to build something fresh, not even try and capture again what you quote unquote lost, but to build fresh from where you are now.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Needed Conversations with Ryan and Viktoriya Cole, bringing you guys some relational wisdom. We have been in the series called
When Love Gets
Tough. And
we've talked about everything from how to fight well in marriage, arguing productively. We talked about betrayal, forgiveness, and today we're going to talk about intimacy, and especially how to build back the intimacy when you feel like that there's been a breach in trust. Maybe it's as far as adultery or betrayal, but maybe it's just a simple waning of the passion between you over the years. And so that's what today's conversation is going to be about. How do you feel about that, Viktoriya?
The truth is that it does wane if you're not intentional with it. I'm actually wearing, if you're watching on YouTube, by the way, we do air these episodes on YouTube. I'm wearing a gray sweatshirt, and I have these stud earrings and also a bracelet that Ryan gave me actually on our first date. And the interesting story about this is I actually was wearing a gray shirt on my first date because I was trying to keep it simple. I had these same studs on. They're like little diamonds. That was very popular during that time.
Little balls with little diamonds all around.
It's like white. And, when we first went out on a date, we were friends for a year before that, for those of you who do not know our story. And he asked me out a year later. It was on Valentine's Day, and I said yes. We went out on a date, and it was really a good time. We spent like 4 hours talking. It was just really, really productive. And towards the end, you gave me this bracelet that a lady at a church made, and it was so interesting because the same beads that was in the bracelet was what I was wearing that day. Like, what are the chances? So sometimes people are like, oh, that must be fate, and it wasn't.
It was kind of a wink.
It was a little bit, yeah, but I think just us having the conversation and getting to know one another, I think, yes, maybe that kind of gave us a little bit like, oh, that's kind of interesting too. But to me, it was more of like God ordained my steps so much so that even these little things, I was really overwhelmed that he thought about little details, because there was no way that you would have known what I was going to wear. And for this lady to pick these specific beads,
I picked
these specific
beads.
Yeah. So, but at the same time, the point that I'm making of the story is it's easy to look at that and to like always reminisce about those times and wish that we had the same kind of infatuation for one another as we did when we first started. And that's what a lot of couples struggle with when we actually have a conversation with them, is there's this expectation that whatever we started with, that's exactly the passion and the fire we're going to have.
The same exact way, the same. And it's good to have sort of some traditions that you have in your marriage and then ultimately your family. But the reality is, like, if any of you are looking at this bracelet, maybe you can hold it up a little bit better, but it is totally not Viktoriya's style.
It is not my style.
And which is probably why the reason she does not wear it.
Yeah, I
but
don't wear
then
it.
she wore it quite often, but I think it was because of what it meant. And the white beads maybe are her style, but then there's these like silvery, I don't know if it was for the time. I mean, you're talking about 12 years ago. So,
but the fascinating thing about this too is the fact that you thought you picked things that you actually liked, and I liked it because you chose it for me. But I think now that you know me, you're like, that's not really her style.
Right.
So that's the difference.
So
that you
like
see
recently
further
on our
down.
last anniversary, I got you a little bangle. It was like a gold,
And
because I
I've
know
been
she
into
loves gold,
bracelets.
thin, kind of modern with a little diamond at the top. So it's the age of our marriage where I'm learning you more, which it's different. And I didn't get you bracelets recently because of the original bracelet or anything like that. But I guess the point of it all is when we think about intimacy, a lot of us are captivated by the flowery origination of the relationship, the butterflies in your feelings, you know. And so then when it comes to years in the marriage, and especially when there's a breach in the trust, it's like, how do you begin again?
Right.
You start questioning, especially during the hard times. Maybe I read into these quote unquote signs, and maybe it was like, then we over spiritualize it. We have dismissed the one theory, which is that there's one particular person out there for everybody. I don't think that that's true. I think that there's a small percentage of people that are very, very God orchestrated relationships. Now, everybody else is, God brings options across your path. And if you are yielded to him and your life is surrendered to him, he's going to direct your steps into good relationships. But ultimately, I think the one is the one you choose, and you have to choose wisely with the wisdom of God. And you have to ask the right questions, and you cannot be caught up in the flowers that you don't see. Yeah, but is the soil rich enough to produce something nourishing in the long run?
Yeah, and I also have to preface this and say, sometimes even asking the right questions, a person can tell you what they believe or what they stand for or what they've been through thus far, but you don't know how they're going to respond in the future. So it's almost like there is a level of trust. You know, when a person tells you specific things, you just don't know, you know, as they age, as they experience certain
preferences
things.
change.
Things completely change. I mean, I've changed styles. We've changed styles. I think even like in our house decor and everything.
Yeah.
And that's okay. It's okay to, what they say, evolve.
You have to give your marriage some flexibility.
Yeah, and it's unrealistic to expect that whatever you've experienced before is going to be the same, because the level of your knowledge is different, and it's actually deeper. Even though you've been through so many things, and maybe even had some hurdles along the way, I think what you gain is just this greater sense of love and trust and admiration for this person that hey, I've seen them in the ugly times. I have seen them in the times where they've struggled or have walked through grief so graciously. For me, that's what cultivates that intimacy, because most of the time people, when they say intimacy, they think, you know, sex. But
right away.
Intimacy is cultivated in every single day moments, every little thing, every interaction, interaction, the emotional connection. It makes sex that much more pleasurable because you know this person even more. You know them, their deepest desires, their deepest hurts, their deepest, you know, pitfalls, but you still love them and care for them. And that's what I feel like builds this. I mean,
it's very similar in the way that your body changes, your hormones change through the years, your libido, even there may be medical reasons why you can't have sex in the way that you used to. Temporary medical reasons, long-term age, all of those things. Now, granted, I believe my grandparents were still happy in that area late into they were very touchy and lovey. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I can imagine. So it's not to say that older people can't get into the action, but I think in the same way that intimacy in other areas changes, so does the physical too. And intimacy is so much more than just sex. And I think in particular for people who have had a betrayal in the relationship and adultery, the big question is, when are we going to have sex again? Yeah. And I don't think that that's the right question to ask. I think especially if you've committed adultery, that's a lot. I mean, there's physical protections on your body because you've shared your body with other people. So for sheer hygiene and, prevention of STDs and so on, there may be some other measures you have to take before you engage in that way. But I think intimacy in terms of, let me discover who my spouse is in this season of their life. Have I overlooked who they were and I'm keeping them boxed in to the girl that I met, 12, 15 years ago. And now she's a woman, a mother. She's endured. She's gone through a lot. And you could say, ladies, the same thing about your husband. Who is he now that life has lifed and has shaped him for the good and the bad? And discovering him from that place, that intimacy is about the pursuit of knowledge, continuing to stay enrolled at the university of your spouse. And intimacy in that way is a spirit, soul, and body connection. Yes, it's about learning to speak each other's love language, but more importantly, it's about not just being into the textbook letter of, okay, my love language is, acts of service or quality time or physical touch, because those things can be misinterpreted as well. Yeah. It's more so about getting into your spouse's space and discovering what makes them tick.
Yeah. And I've listened to a podcast recently and they talked about, for those of you who have experienced some betrayal, understanding a person's history, again, like last week we talked about, it doesn't excuse them to continue that kind of behavior, but that should tell you that they probably need personal counseling and addressing, because a lot of times the other spouse can take blame and say, what did I do that caused them to basically go and find that in somebody else? Do you know what I'm saying?
There may be some personal responsibility that you have,
but in the grand scheme of things, sometimes it's not even about them trying to betray you. It's them trying to cope with certain issues in their heart, which cause them to spiral and make a decision that has hurt you in the process.
I was just thinking, all attention is good attention for someone who is living a dysfunctional life. And so someone who has not dealt with the childhood trauma, someone who has not dealt with the broken relationships in their past before they got to you, whenever the relationship gets to a stale place, maybe their only way of getting your attention is bad attention. I've noticed this in raising your kids too. Yeah, you can train them into dysfunction to where they believe that even spankings are a good thing because at least I got mom and dad's attention. It's their cry for see me, know me, spend time with me. And it's not saying that it's right, but once you address that and say, maybe my spouse is crying out for attention, to be able to address that root. So now they're able to communicate and say, hey, I need more FaceTime with you, or I need more of a connection in this way, or to be able to communicate that in a mature way and you respond can safeguard against some of the bad coping mechanisms that they've developed through their childhood trauma.
Yeah. And I would also say the same for the spouse that has felt betrayed, and now the spouse that has committed that crime against the other spouse is like, when are we going to be intimate?
Yeah.
And you have to be very patient and gracious. And also, you don't know what you have done, that their response may be extreme to you, but you don't know the level of rejection that they've walked through before. And so, like, did they feel rejected or betrayed when they were little, and somebody that was supposed to protect them and guard? I mean, I can say from me, I would speak from myself, that my behavior sometimes mirrors what I've experienced as a child. And so my actions sometimes can be extreme because I feel like maybe my spouse did at one time, but to me, it feels like a repetitive thing that somebody else is doing. And it's a person that I love and admire, and they're not supposed to hurt me.
Right.
And so it's like this kind of a security blanket that you run to. Maybe your spouse, you feel like, is extreme in responding to whatever it is that you did, whether it's, betrayal, whether it's a little thing. It could be a little thing, and your spouse has this extreme, reaction. But you have to also walk in your spouse's shoes and understand their history. And this is where the intimacy is built. When you know what your spouse has went through, you understand how certain things can be more sensitive, and maybe walk them through this healing process. This is something that I've shared many times about our mentor. I really look up to her as a woman, but she talked to us about how she was rejected by her own mother, and how her spouse helped her walk through this healing process. And I'm sure it wasn't easy. I'm sure
to be able to accept physical affirmation and touch and all that in the way that is healthy and appropriate.
Right. Because even it's almost like your spouse is putting a face on somebody that has betrayed them at the beginning. And I know that you may feel like it's unfair, but I think having that understanding will lead you to have more compassion and be more patient while you guys are working through these issues, so that you guys can be more intimate together.
I think the biggest challenge is that if you have been offended by your spouse or betrayed, it's hard to hear what we're saying to you, because it almost feels like that we're pulling the blame off of the perpetrator and putting it onto the victim. And that's not the case at all. It's not about casting blame in any direction. Both of you have a responsibility in the marriage. Maybe you feel like that you've done everything right. I was just listening to a testimony that came across my social media feed about this husband who had deconstructed his faith, and the husband and wife were on stage. He deconstructed his faith. He came to his wife, said, "I no longer believe in God, and I also want a divorce."
We were high school sweethearts. We knew everything. You know the type. Marriage isn't hard. I fell into a season of deep doubt, turned into a full-blown deconstruction of my faith. I fell into drugs and alcohol, and that led me to sit Stephanie down one night and tell her 14 words. I said, "I don't believe in God anymore, and I don't want to be married anymore."
And then divorce became a part of my story at 23, something I never would have imagined.
In the darkest season of my life, I experienced God.
He used that time in my life to show me that even though it was really easy to feel like the victim and everything was on him, that I was not faultless. That my sin was just as destructive. It was just easier to hide. It was pride, it was self-righteousness, all this ugly heart stuff that I was too blind to even see until I was brought to my knees.
Through a season of radical transformation and recovery, I began to hear God telling me that I was supposed to remarry my ex-wife.
We believe in a God who doesn't waste anything. He doesn't waste our hardest, our most painful seasons, and he didn't waste mine.
Marriage is worth the fight. Family is worth the fight. Relationships are worth the work.
And they actually divorced, and she went through a wilderness period. And just to hear her talk on stage, she said, "Yes, my husband did all of these things, but I was so blind to my part in the marriage that I thought that I was spotless lamb over here. But I had stuff inside of my heart and the soil of my heart that needed to be mended by God as well." And he used that time, and their testimony is they got remarried. He came back to the faith. I believe they're in ministry now. Just an incredible story. It's very inspirational. But when it comes to intimacy, particularly after betrayal, it's about learning your spouse again. And it's about giving them access to little places in your heart and your life, it's bite-sized pieces. It's not going to turn around overnight. And in general, whether you've had a big betrayal or not, if you're trying to recultivate intimacy, I want us to look at intimacy from this perspective. My wife loves gardening. Mm-hmm. And as it's springtime, as of the recording of this podcast episode, she's been outside tilling the ground. She's been preparing the flower beds and the garden beds, and just in that whole process, which is a whole world in and of itself that I really have no clue about. I could probably give you the basics of what I learned in school. And if you gave me a handful of seeds, I would go out there and probably dig a hole, put the seeds in, put some water on it, and pray for the best.
Or like our daughter yesterday, she ate an apple and she had some apple seeds, and she was over there, like we were sitting on the porch.
She went into the middle of our front yard.
She was trying to plant it in the middle of the yard where our lawn care guy comes through. And I was like, honey, that's not a good place to plant.
It's going to be swept up by the lawn guy. It's not, it's right in the middle of the blazing sun.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be scorched out.
It's so funny, like just even seeing your kids. But it's, to me, when I garden, God really speaks to me profoundly, because all of his creation speaks of the systems that he's created and put in place for us. You know, before there was a man, God has created a garden. And then he created a man, and he said, you know,
it's not good that you be alone.
But cultivate it too.
You know? Yeah, to cultivate it.
Yeah, that too. I mean, we're talking about marriage, but he's called us to cultivate it. And I'm sure one of the things that I want to ask when I go to heaven is like, what does it mean to not sweat from your brow? Because when I was tilling the ground, I was like, this is a lot of work. It took me like 2 days. I thought it was going to take me a few hours, but I had so many weeds. It was just intense. And it can feel like that sometimes in your marriage, where you feel like, I don't see the product of my work. I feel like I'm constantly sweating. I'm constantly putting the sweat equity, but I'm like, I'm not seeing where this is going. But even like once you prepare the soil and you plant the seed, you have that expectation that it'll grow, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done before it comes. Number one, the seed needs to come into maturity. Every seed has a maturity stage. So all plants have different days that they need gestation. They'll mature and start producing. And then there's always, you have to keep watering it. You have to make sure you keep check with your soils, pest control, cats. I mean, one thing I'm learning in this area is we have like 20 feral cats that are walking around. So I had
to
put
the whole neighborhood.
I had to put this ultrasonic sound machine because they've been using my planter boxes as litter boxes. So just little things that you have to be very vigilant. You can't just think, I'll just throw in the seeds, whatever grows, grows. And if not, who cares? You can't come with that expectation. The same with your marriage. Like, you have to be very intentional. So if you plant the seeds, yes, you definitely should have that expectation that it should produce fruit.
But it's not going to produce right away.
But it's not going to do it right away. Yeah. And sometimes things can come across and that plant dies, or that seed just doesn't reach the gestation period. Things happen. This is just life. In the Bible, it talks about that the rain falls on the just and the unjust. And sometimes we do feel like, God, why did this happen to me? I feel like I did all these right things. And
I did everything right and it didn't work out.
It didn't work out. But I think when you have that perspective that, this is life, this is part of life. Sometimes life throws you curveballs and you are out of control as to what the other person does. You're only in control of what you are able to do with your hands. And honestly, like, you get in a phase where I feel like you prepare the garden, you'll start seeing these plants grow and it looks pretty. And this always fascinates me about gardening. It looks really nice. It looks really kempt. But then at some point it looks like it's wild. It's almost out of control because now it's so booming, like constantly you have to pull the produce off, you have to prune, and these limbs are just going haywire. Even if you're trying to tuck them in a certain way, at some point it just becomes wild. And
I think that there's a picking time as well. Like, I think that if you let certain things like watermelon even get so large, I don't know, they don't taste as good. Like there's a certain size and shape and ripeness.
Well, they have a little tail. Normally it'll tell you, like, it'll start shriveling. That's when you know when it's ready.
So it's about timing.
It's about timing. It's about knowing what to look for, what to expect. But
I think it's a beautiful illustration, like thinking of the garden that man was put in to cultivate. And then that was where the first marriage was born, in the middle of a garden. Mm-hmm. And I would say Jesus was buried in a garden tomb. Mm-hmm. And so again, it's literally.
And then Martha, was it Martha that?
I think it was Mary.
Mary, she assumed that he was the gardener.
So the next marriage, because we're the bride of Christ, was born again in a garden as the church was pulled out of him in that time, as we were resurrected with him. There's so many interesting parallels, and it's a good thing to explore, especially in this time when we're about to come upon Passover and Resurrection Sunday and Good Friday and all of that. But I think about the role of men and women that are sort of hybrid in nature. Mm-hmm. I often say that the role of a man is to be a cultivator. And Ephesians talk about to wash your wife with the water of the word and those sorts of things. And I say to men all of the time, the wife you have is the wife you've cultivated. And so there's greatness inside of her, but like a gardener, Adam was, to bring forth the fruit of what was blossoming and to cultivate it and prune it and all of these things. You have that assignment from God to cultivate your wife and to bring out the best in her. And in like manner, it's very similar, the function, but slightly different. Is a woman is a nurturer. Mm-hmm. So a man is a cultivator, a woman is a nurturer. And she does in a similar way, brings out the best in us and encourages us and calms us. And at least that's what she's supposed to be. And is that prophetic voice in our life. And then you consider the book of the Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs. Almost the whole entire allegory is like they use these garden terms, and it's very kind of sexual as well. I mean, Song of Solomon 4:12 says, a garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. And this verse portrays that the bride is like a protected and cherished garden. And it emphasizes the exclusivity of that relationship, the sacredness of the marital intimacy. Song of Solomon 4:16, awake, O north wind, and come, thou south, blow upon my garden, that the spices thereof may flow out. I mean, you can read in between the lines there. Song of Solomon 5, I come into my garden, my spouse, my sister, I have gathered my myrrh with my spice, I've eaten the honeycomb with the honey. Song of Solomon 6, my beloved has gone down into his garden. Okay, there's all of these allegories here. Mm-hmm. And we were talking a little bit earlier about how a garden might begin versus how a garden gets put to use. And there's a couple of questions that people have when it comes to passion and whether it should be more organic or whether it should be intentional. And I think it's both.
It's a little bit of both.
It's a little bit of both. And the reason why it felt like the passion came so easily at the beginning of your relationship is because you both came in, number one, with a desire to know one another, and you were very inquisitive. But I look at it like one of those wild gardens. Have you ever seen those? I mean, it's kind of like a trend now that people
I actually
cultivate a wild garden.
I've planted like a mixed seeds, and it's wildflowers, and they come back every single year. And they're so fascinating because it's multicolor and there's so many different variations.
So it's beautiful. It's spectacular. It seems wild and unkempt to a degree.
It seemed very easy to do.
It is easy to do.
It is very easy to do. Most
you
of the
just
time,
throw the seed and it comes about.
They're very like low maintenance. You don't even have to pretty much do anything besides maybe once they dry off, kind of chop.
And that's good at the beginning of your relationship because guess what? You both go home, you're taking care of yourself, or you're at your parents' home. Yeah. The responsibilities aren't high. You don't have kids, so there's not a lot at stake here. And so then you get married and you've got this beautiful flower garden, and then the seasons change and the flowers wilt. And you say, where are these flowers? But then you're asking the wrong question, in my opinion, because the flowers aren't what you need at this point. You need sustenance. You need vegetables and fruits, and you need energy and calories. And so planting wildflowers versus planting and cultivating potatoes and tomatoes and cucumbers and water, all of that, that's a different kind of effort. But the harvest, what it gives you in terms of nourishment and strength is far greater than what those wildflowers could give you. You know, the wildflowers are good. You gather them up, put them in the middle of a table. But at the end of the day, when you're hungry, you need something of depth.
You may be able to make some tea with it, but that's pretty much it.
But you were telling me something earlier today, which was you actually still need some flowers.
You do need flowers
that
because
when you're having vegetables.
It's called pollinators. So like when the bees travel from flower to flower, and actually the fruit vegetation, most of them have flowers as well. So there's cross-pollination. So it's really good to have some kind of flower or many different flowers.
It helps in the growth process.
To grow more vegetation, yes.
So, but it goes from when you're first dating or coming together with your spouse, from the whole entire garden is wildflowers. You know, it's beautiful, it's wild, it's exciting. And you need to keep a little section of the garden for those flowers.
It's fun. It's still flirty. It's something that you can still be playful with. And that's the aspect of your marriage you could still bring in with you throughout your life.
You still need that little corner of the relationship that's those wildflowers.
But I think a legit garden is more structured. And this is why we teach that every marriage should have a mission. So when you are planning your garden, number one, you have to plan, because you have to study the soil, where you're located, where the sun is, where the base placement is, and then what your family eats. Because just as every marriage is unique, every garden can be unique. There are general rules that you may have to follow in order to get the best results, but every garden and every gardener, it's going to be very different what they plant, because every family is going to be eating something different. Or maybe you're a farmer and you're wanting to grow a specific crop. So you have to study that specific crop, what it's going to take, and plan it out and work together in order to bring the maximum amount of harvest, not only for your family. Most of the time, whenever it's actually harvest time, every gardener can tell you, we produce so much, we have to give to our neighbors. And that's the purpose of a mission-based marriage, is that you are able to produce so much that your house overflows. It's not only left for your children, for you to fill up your storehouses, but it seeps on to your neighbor. For those who are in need, that's one of my goals, is whenever we have our retreat center, is to have a huge garden, because I want to be able to teach that to kids, because I think some people hear the voice of God in a different way, and that's how I do, is working physically with hands, but also just show the beauty of being able to share with the community what God is able to do, because the way He created, this creation is amazing. And so it not only teaches us in the process, but we are able to minister to others by also providing maybe some kind of a physical need. You never know what you're able to do, what your marriage is able to do.
What your marriage can produce.
When you are working out of the overflow.
Yeah. And I think it's beautiful. There's so many different little paths that we could take here with this illustration, because, I think about what I would want in my garden. I'm a meat and potatoes kind of boy. So plant me some russet potatoes.
I was looking at collard greens. I'm like, oh Lord, I don't like
she doesn't eat collard greens.
So I'm like, I don't
Or
know.
she'd be like, let me cultivate a little corner of mushrooms over here. And I don't like mushrooms at all.
Yeah. So,
but you know what? You've got to come together with your spouse and say, I can't just plant a garden that I want to enjoy.
Yeah.
I gotta say, well, what will my spouse enjoy in this garden of our marriage as well? Yeah. I hope you're reading between the lines. I know this sounds a little heady, a little...
And it's hard to address a lot of these issues if you are going through major betrayal and you're trying to rebuild that intimacy. This is why we're talking about every marriage being unique. You definitely need that one-on-one interaction with, a good therapist. And this is why we encourage people to reach out early. Don't wait until it's so overgrown with weeds. Now we have to till the ground for months and months and months. You don't want to have to be
might be
at
that place.
You may be at
where
that
you
place,
have some bitter roots in the ground that have to be, uprooted. I don't know if any of you ever saw that movie, The Shack, which was actually based on a book.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
You have told me about it, but
you weren't really
I'm
into
too
it.
sensitive because I get sensitive about that
Because the story
kind of
was
stuff,
about losing a child and all of that.
I'm like, I don't want to watch it.
But he's taken away, this father who loses his daughter. She's abducted and killed. And it was based on a novel by William Paul Young, something like that. I actually got to meet the author, and I actually was able to sit at a premiere with him and watch that movie when it came out. So that was a really interesting experience that I had when we were in Atlanta. And he probably wouldn't remember me, but nevertheless, it was a cool experience. But one of the most beautiful scenes in the book and then also in the movie was the Holy Spirit was a gardener. And so when he goes to this shack, it's like the supernatural experience. It's actually the shack where his daughter is murdered. And he sees the blood stained. And as he's in his anguish and grief, the shack transforms. And over the course of a weekend, he interacts with the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. But they show up in unusual ways. Well, the Holy Spirit is in the garden, and she's like tilling up all of the stuff. Like she's in there, and she's like, when he gets to the garden, he says, "This is beautiful. Why are you uprooting?" It's kind of like what we're talking about today. Like, why are you uprooting it? These are beautiful, like wild, exotic flowers. And she's like, "We're making space. We're making space for what is needed, what's to come." He has no idea what's to come. Well, what's to come is he's going to bury his daughter. And she takes all of those flowers that she had made room for planting something new. She took all of those flowers and they basically covered her body with that, and it made it smell fragrant like potpourri or whatever. It sounds weird if you haven't seen the movie, but it's just the Holy Spirit will do that work in you if you'll yield to him in the process of your grief and your feelings of hatred, and you want payback, and you feel the poison of the sting of what you've experienced. And how could I ever have a garden with my spouse again? How could I ever give them access to the soil of my heart? But as you allow the Holy Spirit to uproot those bitter places in you, you'll discover an opportunity, if your spouse is willing to do the work with you, to plant something extraordinary where you guys can, like Viktoriya said, feed for generations to come. And right now, you also have to recognize, maybe you didn't have a betrayal, but maybe you're in a low point. Gardens have seasons as well. Like you have your harvest season, you have your planting season, and then you have like where the ground goes cold and through the winter time. But guess what? During that winter time, you're eating the harvest from the previous season. Now, what's going to be really, really hard is if you didn't plant, you didn't have a harvest season, and here comes the winter, and now you're starving. And you might have to reach out to someone else and say, "Can we share from your table for a bit until we cycle back around and are able to endure the season of planting in order for our harvest to come?" And I think that's where mediation comes in. Yeah. And mentorship. Go ahead.
That, and then I was also thinking about the Proverbs 31 woman. There is a part that talks about that, her family does not go hungry because she prepares, and then they're all dressed during the winter. And so sometimes you have to glean from people that have wisdom. You may not have a green thumb. You may not do certain things. Maybe you're not called to that specific industry, and that's okay. Or maybe you just don't know where to start. There's always, at least here, there's always a place for you to reach out to us and ask for help, ask for mediation. And we always say, if we're not able to help with your situation, or we feel like there will be a better person suited for that or a better resource, we are here just to give you guidance and direction. I mean, we've gleaned from so many people, especially during the hardest seasons of our lives. I think during the loss of our first child, walking through that grief, that was a lot. And I think what helped us get out of that rut was to reach out to somebody that has also walked through that process, and how they were able to encourage us and also pray for us. And don't wait and feel like you're the only one dealing with this situation and feel the shame. There's no shame in asking for help. If you're struggling, reach out to somebody. And even if your spouse is not willing, maybe you personally
can go through that.
Yeah, you start the journey. You start tilling up the ground of your heart and God will do a work inside of them as well.
Yeah, reach out to us, 864-428-7131, moremostforever.com. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook at moremostforever. This kind of rounds out our series on when love gets tough. And we're going to start a new series coming up next week that you want to be a part of, and just share this with someone you feel like needs encouragement today. Maybe they don't know where to begin to build back intimacy in their marriage, whether there's betrayal or whether it's just grown stale. And there's been a season where you didn't plant, and so it's been years without a harvest. You can still cultivate again. I know when we first moved into this house, the lady who was here was elderly. She had kind of given up on gardening. The neighbor tried to help a little bit, but when you got out there, there was a lot of rot in the wood around the flower beds. There was a lot of rebuilding that you had to do. But now you're starting to see some harvest. And so the same can be true for you. There's opportunity for you to restore your marriage, to build something fresh, not even try and capture again what you quote unquote lost, but to build fresh from where you are now. So this has been a needed conversation.
Yes, it has. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week.